Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you, friends, for joining me tonight. I'm Carol Tanjutco, your host for our session on tax planning 2022 and beyond under the new law, the Secure Act. Now, before I take you to the session proper, I want you to know that we are holding series of wealth planning strategies throughout the year. And these are part of the subjects that we will take. The durable power of attorney, which is part of the basic estate planning documents, wills, trusts. There's so many different kinds of trusts, and we will take up this trust one by one with the help of our counsel, our trust and estate planning attorney, Albert Lumawag. He's not joining us today, but we have two esteemed professors who will be joining us, and I will introduce them to you in a little while. Professor Colin Slabach, and from the Philippines, Professor Geronimo. Now, part of the topic that we will also take during this year is something very close to my heart: avoiding elder abuse. And before the year ends, charitable giving and tax advantages of charitable giving. So moving on, how the Secure Act impacts your IRA. Secure Act means setting every community up for retirement enhancement. This law was signed in December 2019 by Trump, and it took into effect in 2020. So let's make it easy to remember. If you turn 70 and a half years old in the year 2020, that means your required minimum distribution will be age 72. When we talk about required minimum distribution, this is the time that IRS want to take their money, and you have to take from your IRA, whether you need it or not, at the age of 72 onwards. And the basis is IRS gives a certain rate, which is based on the lifespan. So let's talk about how the new law can impact your IRA. For most Americans, the biggest asset that we own is our own retirement account. Of course, next to our homes and other real estate. Now, the major difference that this brings is something that you probably know, which is the age of RMD that has been changed to 72 years old. So now, when you turn 72, that's the only time that you start taking out from your old 401k, 403b, or those other assets that you rolled over into your IRA, into a traditional IRA. And also, at age 72, if you are still working or if you have a self-employment income, then you can continue to build up your traditional IRA. That's another change that the new law brought. Before, if you're 70 and a half, you can no longer contribute to your IRA. But these are welcome changes. Now, the challenge is this. There is now the what you call the partial elimination of the stretch IRAs for the non-spousal beneficiaries. Now, here's the case. For couples, it's fine because if you have an IRA, your beneficiary is likely to be your spouse, right? And that is no problem because your spouse will simply take your IRA as his or her own IRA. And that is not an issue. It's what we've been doing in the past. However, the problem is if you are in fact the only spouse left, and now you have the inherited IRA as your own IRA, or if you have, for example, the next of kin, like adult children, as your beneficiaries, now it is an issue because under the new law, they have only 10 years to spend down the money because Uncle Sam wants taxation. You see, when the Secure Act came into effect, this costs federal government about $15 billion, and they need to raise the money. So it's plus minus How do they raise the money? By eliminating the stretch period. So now you're given 10 years to spend down the money and taxation comes out of it. This is when planning comes in. If you have, let's say, 500,000 at the time of your retirement that you have accumulated over time to $1 million pre-tax money, meaning it hasn't been taxed. And if you are going to pass it on to your adult children, think about the tax bracket of your adult children. Maybe they're in the 45, 50% bracket. So guess what happens at that time? Your $1 million, you're basically giving 50% of that amount for taxation. And so this planning makes a lot more sense right now for you to consider how we are going to convert some of your taxable dollars into after-tax money. Now, part also of what changed with the Secure Act is, well, this is a welcome change though. If you have a child, for those among you with a 401k, you can take $5,000 for every child born or adopted. And that $5,000 will be free of the 10% penalty. Usually when you take money from your 401k and for birth expenses before, you will still be charged the 10% penalty, but not anymore under the Secure Act. And one other change that I want to add, although this is not directly involved with the IRA, is the 529 account, where you can use the most that you could use, about $10,000 in order to pay your already incurred college loans. So moving on, let's talk about the three major categories of these assets. You have taxable assets, you have tax-deferred assets, and tax-free. Most of you might ask, which assets are you going to spend first? Now, maybe not all financial advisors have discussed this with you, but we in the retirement income profession, this is the core of our planning. A person who retires at age 62, that's what we call the young old. So you see, there's what you call the young old, the median old, and the old old. When you retire at 62 or 65, we're talking about 30 years of planning. Isn't that wonderful? What are we going to do the next 30 years? So it is at this point that we start discussing with you as well, what kind of assets do you have? So again, we'll follow these spending options from taxable. We go to tax deferred and the tax free. What do you think are your taxable assets? These include your brokerage accounts, the non-qualified accounts. When you retire at the age of 62, or even for most retirees, even at age 72, your tax bracket is not as high as it was when you were working, right? So we want to take this opportunity for you to use up your money that is taxable. And then when you get to 72, now we talk of your RMD age, the required minimum distribution age. Whether you like it or not, you have to take your money under a tax deferred account. So that includes your IRA. That includes some annuities that you have set aside, which has been growing over time, tax deferred, and it's going to get taxed on the day that you withdraw it. So going back to 62 years old, up to 72, you have 10 years to grow that money. So go ahead and grow that money in a tax deferred account. And like I said, let's spend first the taxable money. Now we reach the median old age at 72, right? And we started taking the RMD. There's another strategy that I'm going to talk to you about in the later part of the program, where we're going to start converting more money into a tax-free account. So when we get to the old age, I'm talking about past 80, like 80, 82, all the way to 95 and beyond. This is the point we want you to start spending your tax-free money. Whether for some big spending, unexpected spending, we just want to know that you're not going to be so burdened by bigger taxes at a later age. Let's talk about our goals in retirement planning. This is what I call the 4 pillars of a happy retirement: longevity, liquidity, lifestyle, and legacy. The good news is human lives are much, much longer now. And that is why planners are thinking about 30, 35 years from the time that you retire. What are we going to do and how do we get there? Necessarily, with the good news is a challenge. The main issue is, can I afford it? How long will my retirement assets last? And along with that, we will introduce to you a bucket style of planning. How long your assets last will depend on what allocations are you into. Are you in a fixed 2% or 4% income? Maybe some bonds? Or are you into equities? When we talk of equities, we talk of higher risk. And of course, we will determine your risk tolerance along with your other assets where you are placed right now. But for purposes of our bucket planning, we put some money in the higher risk category, like the small cap. The small cap, by the way, for some of you who are not very familiar, we have 3 major categories: the small cap, the mid cap, and the large cap. The small cap is those industries that has below 2 billion capitalization. The mid cap is those between 2 to 10 billion. And the large cap, this includes your S&P 500, the biggest corporations in America, the 500 biggest corporations. And you always hear this S&P 500 when you watch the TV, right? But also part of the large cap are all corporations over 10 billion in capitalization. So where do we place your assets? This merits a very careful, in-depth look and assessment. And this is going to be a one-on-one topic with each one of you. Now, let's talk about in this process, we have what you call a 4% rate of withdrawal. And of course, at this point, I welcome any comment from our professor, Colin Slabach, did a very in-depth study and research about the Bengen rule, where the 4% rate of withdrawal was shown to be a most effective withdrawal rate, which means that if you just take 4% of your money, it's going to last you for at least 30 years and you're fine. But Professor Slabach, what are the other consequences of this 4% withdrawal rate?
Well, that's a great question. So I don't know if you can see me if I'm popping up or not, but that's okay. So the 4% rule was created by Bill Bengen. I believe it was in the 1980s. And what he did is he looked at the United States rate of return going back to 1926, so right after World War II, all the way up to the present date at the time, so around 1980. And he said, what is the most that someone can withdraw out of their portfolio every single year? And he did a 50% allocation to stocks and bonds. And he said, what is the maximum amount where no one out of this time period will have money? And so he did it for a 30-year period. And he found the worst case scenario happened in 1966 to 1995. So I guess I believe he must have done this and past the 1995, or he wouldn't have had the data for that. So the worst time period was 1966 to 1995. And he found that an individual who spent 4.15% of their portfolio adjusted for inflation didn't run out of money. So one of the kind of the ramifications of this is if you spend 4% of your portfolio, most of the time you're going to have a lot more than $1 when you pass away. So there is a huge opportunity that you're missing out on a lot of upside. So there's a different approach called the guardrail approach that a lot of individuals use. And so what that entails is when the market is down, you spend less. So you try and spend about 20% less. And when the market is up, you can actually spend about 20% more. And using that kind of dynamic withdrawal approach, you'll be able to spend a lot more in retirement versus if you just did the standard 4% rule. So if you did instead of 4% rule, you said, I'm going to start with withdrawing. I had $1 million portfolio. You could withdraw, say, $50,000 or $60,000 instead of 40,000. So if the market goes down, then you're going to be spending less. And when it goes up, you actually be spending more.
And that is what we want to hear. It's more like the dynamic withdrawal rate. And this is something that we're going to take a look at your portfolio every year. And also, it depends on what your spending needs might be. You see, Professor Colin, I have clients who would call me, tell me that, hey, I need to change my boat. I need to upgrade the bigger boat. So how much money can I take? So that is more like a dynamic withdrawal strategy that we do. And it so happened the past 12 years, the market is doing really great. And this is just one of the examples that working with advisors can really, really help you get there and have a more satisfying use of your money. Now, let's talk about my favorite topic, lifestyle and legacy. Now, part of retirement is knowing that you have all the time in your hands. Now, you can do the things that you always wanted to do, right? Have you set aside money for this? How about travel? How much money set aside for travel? Hobbies, maybe you have new hobbies, or maybe there are new courses that you want to learn, and entertainment. This is the time in our life that we could see more friends and more family and just have fun and enjoy. But let's take a look at our portfolio. Let's add the cost of all of this to our annual spending. And what about the quality of life? For some of you, you might have provided for a long-term care, but for many of us, we're hoping we don't get there, but what if we do? I think the latest number in New York alone for an annual long-term care expense is about $97,000. And it depends, are you going to stay home? So these are issues that are very, very important to us planners. And so we take a look at your overall portfolio and we try to put as much as tax-free money for you towards the later part of your spending. Now, charitable giving, this is a different issue. We talk about leaving tax-free money to our beneficiaries, right? And that's the best money that you can leave for your beneficiaries. But if your beneficiaries are charitable institutions, for example, or part of it, what you can do is use your highly appreciated assets. For example, stocks. The stock portfolio that you probably bought a long time ago or probably inherited from your grandfather, which has multiplied over 100 times by now. This is the best asset that you can move into the charitable institution. And if you are talking about an IRA that you want to give to a charity, remember the charity will have only, if a charity will be free of taxes, but if you're giving it to another institution, well, they have 5 years to spend down that money. Well, we have strategies that we do. For brokers, we call that an in-kind transfer. For those of you with the cryptocurrency accounts, and I see some of you joining us right now, if you wish to transfer those, there is a way to transfer the cryptocurrency and bypass taxation. Again, it's a strategy that we use. Now, meeting all of this, you have your lifestyle, your legacy, and your basic needs. We go back down to the issue of, well, how do we get the tax-free money? Let me just pick one. Okay. To Roth or not to Roth? That is a very important question. Every financial advisor should be discussing with you about Roth conversion strategies. Is it right for you? Well, we know the advantages of tax-free money. And we just talk about the inherited IRAs. Going back to the changes in the Secure Act, this is huge. When you're leaving this inherited IRAs, it is better to consider a Roth conversion. And every year, think about age 62. Remember, if you are one of those who are the young retirees who just started enjoying life at 62, from 62 to 72, you have 10 years, right? That is the time we will start doing the 10% conversion every year. Whether or not it's right for you, take a look here on the other side. Look at the future tax rate. Let me ask you, where are we going with taxation? Is it going to be higher or lower? Most likely it's going to be higher, right? Now, the amount of the IRA that you have right now, are you using all of your IRA, or are you one of those clients of mine who tell me, you know, I really don't need this IRA. I have enough pension and I'm saving this IRA for my grandchildren. Then you might be a good candidate for Roth conversion, on an annual Roth conversion if needed. The next issue when you do a Roth conversion is paying taxes out of pocket. Most people would tell me, oh, please withhold 20% of taxes from my IRA when we convert it to Roth, and that is fine. But you know what's a better deal? If you have the just in case money set aside, how much are they making in your checking account or in your money market account? How about use that money to pay for the taxes so that when you do your Roth conversion for the year, let's say you're doing 50,000 conversion, then you're converting more money that's going to make more money tax-free. But if you take 20% of that, then you're investing less money that's going to be tax-free. Let's talk about asset appreciation. Where are you going to be invested in? If we are talking about Roth conversion, I take a look at the overall asset allocations of a client, and I'll try to put the riskiest assets towards the Roth conversion. Because the Roth conversion, the free money is going to be the last pocket of money that you're going to use, which means it has the most time in terms of years that your money can grow. So we talk of the time horizon. So here's the Roth conversion process. Again, going back to the 62-year-old retiree, let's say it started with a 500,000 bucket, right? Over 10 years, if I'm going to do a plan of a 10-year conversion, that will entail 50,000 conversion every year. So that 50,000 goes into the Roth IRA, pay the tax for the year that you converted. But moving forward, this money is growing tax-free. So year after year, you're going to double, you're going to triple this money. Everything will be tax-free. And think about the next 20 years. Even if you're 72 right now or you're 75 right now, think of the many, many years ahead of you that all this money can grow absolutely tax-free. So Roth conversion process is a very important process in my planning, because towards the end, when we get to what we call the old age, which is like the 85 and beyond, I'm talking about tax-free money. What if you suddenly 200,000 in 1 year? Can you imagine if you have to pay 200,000 taxes for that year alone? What if you need an extra 100,000 for whatever reason, medical, whatever, or long-term care? Imagine paying 300,000 taxable income for the year. So no, it is not a very smart move. So while we can, we're going to get you started in this process. But again, it depends on each one of you. Everybody has a different situation. So at this point, you might have a lot of questions in your mind, and reserve those questions for me towards the later part, or you can even just call me later on if we do run out of time. But I want to bring to you my professor from the American College. Colin Slabach is the Assistant Director of the American College Center for Retirement Income, the American College of Financial Services. That's where I obtained my degree on Retirement Income Certified Professional. It's a new program that's similar to CFP with focus on retirees. Colin is an expert in retirement planning and charitable giving, and we're going to talk about charitable giving towards the end of the year. And Colin has been very active even in the personal finance program. He was a student body representative with the Personal Financial Planning Alumni Advisory Board. So at this point, I'm going to stop the sharing so Colin can join us. Colin, please.
It's a pleasure to be here. It's great to see you outside of the classroom, and I guess we're all virtual, so it was never actually in a classroom, but it's great to be here. So I am a professor at the American College for Financial Services, where I've been there for about 2.5 years. I'm currently also finishing up my PhD at Texas Tech University, where I'm specializing in retirement planning and charitable giving. So very on topic topics you have here. I think you did a great presentation, and I guess just one thing I would like to add is the most inefficient way you can give is cash. So giving cash is extremely inefficient. So I would say I almost want to go over and talk to grandma or whoever's putting cash in the offering bin at church as it goes around. I want to say, hey, no, we need a paper trail here. We need to give appreciated stock and do this the other ways. And they're like, well, I don't quite understand this. And I say, the only person, they always assume, how do I have my cake and eat it too? It's like, well, the only person losing out is the IRS. And this is perfectly legal way of doing it too. So if you are giving cash to an organization, you do want to create that paper trail just from a tax planning standpoint, but it is a much better way to try and give some type of appreciated stock or something else, because they don't pay taxes. And when you sell that stock, you are going to pay taxes. So Carol, I don't know how you want to do this. Are we just going to have?
Well, I want you, Colin, also to talk about I-bonds. I recently received an inquiry about I-bonds. And this is a gentleman who's holding a huge amount in stocks portfolio, and asked me about maybe this is the time to go lower risk and take some I-bonds. But I know there's a limit in just how much you could purchase. And also, what are the tips for those who miss the year-end to-do list that we have? Well, what else can they do for the rest of the year? Why don't you take us through the steps?
I-bonds has been kind of my latest research project that I've been working on. And an I-bond is a government security. So it's a government bond. So it's backed by the full faith of the United States government, which is fairly secure asset. Despite what people say about the debt and everything, the government has met all of its financial obligations in the past. And there is a pretty safe assumption that they're going to continue to meet those obligations in the future. Well, recently we have seen a stock market run that has been absolutely phenomenal for individuals who own stocks. People on the low end, the lower income individuals have seen the greatest increase in wages, while people on the high end have seen the greatest appreciation. They're the greatest holders of stock, and they've seen the greatest appreciation of stock. So everywhere else in the middle has not done nearly as well as those at the top and then those at the bottom. So now I'm all for the people at the bottom. The people at the top I'm not as concerned with. But everyone else is kind of, they don't realize it yet, but they've actually lost out on some purchasing power. So inflation has actually, some people have noticed it at the gas tank. And maybe if you've had to buy a used car or something, you've noticed that the prices have gone up. But a lot of people may not notice as much, perhaps like the food prices and everything that have gone up. But that is eating away at your ability to spend. You're now spending more on the same amount of goods. And so that's just the dangers of inflation. And we're going to probably see inflation be higher for a longer period of time. Well, this is where an I bond comes in. So an I bond is the government-backed security that is invested and will pay you the interest rate that tracks inflation. So if inflation is 4%, it will give you a 4% rate of return for that year. If it's 6%, it'll give you a 6% rate of return. And so
well, I realize, Professor, it is now 7.12% interest paying, correct?
yes.
And how long do you think will that last?
So that's the interesting part is it did jump way up. It's now 7.12% interest, and that will last for the next 6 months. So whenever you purchase it, it will last for 6 months. And then after that 6 months, it'll be reevaluated at the current interest rate. So it may go from 7% down, 7.12% for the 6 months down to say maybe 3% or something like that. It's probably going to go down, but it probably won't go down excessively. And this is a government-backed security. So a comparable investment would be like your CDs that you're investing in at banks and things. So a way to invest and get that rate of return is rather intriguing how high it's been. And it probably will continue to do so for a little while. But there are some limitations. And the first limitation is there's $10,000 per year per individual. So if you're married, you can put in $10,000 for yourself and for your wife, and you can actually set up minor accounts. So if you have 2 children, you could put $10,000 in for a child and then $10,000 for your other child. And so this is also based on a calendar year. So if you put in $10,000 now for you and your spouse, it'd be $20,000. You could do another $20,000 next year. And so this would just be a way, it's a great means of having your emergency fund and things after you let it sit for a year. So there is a lockout period for a year where you can't sell. Now, for some reason, inflation plummets. Let's say inflation goes down to 0%. And so it doesn't offer an interest for 6 months. You can pull the money out, but you have to let it sit for at least 12 months. Now, if you pull it out before 5 years, you're going to forfeit your last 3 months of interest. But if the interest rate is 0, then you're not really forfeiting any interest. If it's at 1%, then you'd forfeit the 1% for the last 3 months. So that's just kind of a careful approach, but I'm a big proponent of individuals who are kind of in the middle class to upper middle class to really look at I bonds and consider them as a viable alternative to your bond portfolio. Another advantage of them is they're tax deferred, so you won't be taxed until you actually sell. But you will need to watch out because they do change the interest rate every March and November. So that's when they'll come out with their new rates, and then you can decide whether you want to keep it in there or you can decide to remove it out. I've actually got an article coming out. I can send it to you, Carol, when it's out, and it'll explain kind of in more depth the value of NI bonds in a portfolio. I'm going to go through a end of the year and kind of start of the year list. So things you may have missed for the end of the year that if I was your financial advisor, you wouldn't have missed. If Carol was your financial advisor, hopefully you didn't miss this either. I'm assuming she'd have taken care of you. So the first one, is Carol talked about, was RMDs. So you don't want to miss your RMD. So the required minimum distribution. So people that were 70 and a half or now the 72 or older had to claim an RMD. If you miss your RMD, you need to make sure you take it as soon as possible because there is a hefty tax penalty. It's actually 50%. And that's a rather excessive tax penalty. So if you had a $2,000 RMD, $1,000 in tax penalty, that's not fun. There's no one that wants to pay that. So the second one is spending down your flex spending account. So flex spending accounts are for your short-term medical and dental needs. So you can set them up through your employer. Some will allow you to roll over $500 to the next year. and some will not. So that's the key, is you have to know which ones are which. I always fund mine for my dental needs, and then my glasses and contacts. So I say, how much are my contacts going to be at Costco? That's the amount going into my FSA, and then how much for my 2 dental cleanings, and then that's the amount that goes in. So you actually don't pay taxes on that money, which is a nice advantage. But if you don't spend it by the end of the year, you lose it. Sometimes there's a 3-month grace period afterwards. So you may still be in that grace period. So make sure you spend down that flex spending dollars. Another decision that you probably forced to make was your health insurance and employee benefits decision. So that's a very important one. You need to be very careful with those decisions. We see a lot of individuals who postponed their elective procedures last year and are now going to be having, I call them elective procedures in quotes, because they're elective in the fact that you may not need them right now, but you're going to need them sooner rather than later. And so a lot of them postponed that because of COVID. And now a lot of individuals are going to start to get those different procedures. Another one is to check your annual credit report. So you get 1 free credit report check every single year. And people are like, oh, well, I don't use my credit card. I don't have credit cards. I don't have a loan, all of these things. Well, it's still good to check. So you want to make sure that you're checking that in case there's someone fraud. There could be some fraud. There could be something on there that you didn't do, completely nothing to do with you. It's a lot easier if you catch it early. Another one that I always say, I don't think it's really an end of the year thing that people missed, is you should sign up for mysocialsecurity.gov. That's right. So you can actually track your Social Security. And I've signed up for my account. I'm a little bit a ways from collecting Social Security, but I could get another Social Security card from there if I was to lose mine. And then I can also make sure that they're accurately putting in my information correctly. So you have what's called a 1-year window to challenge. If you think they're not, you paid in more into the Social Security system than they're giving you credit for. And in the future, that's going to become much bigger of a deal, especially when you're collecting your benefits. There's also a ton of other things that you can do on there once you've started collecting Social Security. So it's definitely important. And then there's also, I would have to say, there's some fraud alerts there too. You don't want some people signing up for my Social Security .gov account under your name. Start of the year things that you may have missed, I would have probably done at the end of the year, but you're still able to do, is adjust your payroll contributions for retirement. So you always want to make sure you're getting your company match. Definitely want to be at least getting your company match. But now the actual total amount, the ceiling has lifted from $19,500 to $20,500. So if you are kind of on that cusp of maybe your highest earnings potential and really close to retirement and saving large amounts of money for retirement, you can now put an additional $1,000 if you would have maxed that out last year. Another thing I like to do is review your annual budget. I don't like to promote specific companies per se, but I personally use mint.com, tracks all my expenses. They don't code everything correctly, but you can go through and change it. And it's not about the budgeting process or trying to be conservative or frugal. I just like to make sure that my money is going where my values are. So if I want to have the Netflix subscription or I want to get the Starbucks coffee, I'm totally fine with that. But I don't want to be spending it on something that I'm not enjoying or something that I need. So I'm just wanting to make sure that my money is aligned with where I want to be spending it. So health savings accounts. So those are going to become a bigger and bigger thing. Health savings accounts are now predominantly for individuals who are healthy. So I wouldn't recommend a health savings account for individuals who are unhealthy. So someone who is healthier can choose what's called a high deductible plan for their health. And what that allows them to do is actually put money into this, what's called the health savings account or the HSA. And you can actually contribute money in there and you won't pay taxes on it. And if you do have a medical expense in the future, then you can use that money and it will come out tax-free. So personally for me, I try and max out my health savings account and then I'll invest that money. And I'm hoping that here in 10, 20 years, I may have $20, $30, $40,000 in a health savings account. So any major medical incident in the future, this account will outpace that medical expenses that I have. And so it's really fantastic because when you get later in life, you can actually purchase long-term care policies with it. And or you can choose, there's a one-time election to roll it over into an IRA. So it is another means of saving for retirement. And the last one that I have is you have to know where your money is invested. So a lot of people have their money spread out over a ton of different accounts. And I think Carol would probably be an excellent individual to be able to coordinate all of those, especially for individuals who may have some 401k assets, IRA assets. You want to watch where you're invested. So if you're invested in a 50% stocks and 50% bonds, and then you, for some reason, went to sleep and woke up 10 years later, it's no longer going to be a 50-50 portfolio. The stocks are probably going to outpace the bonds, and you're probably looking at what we like to call a portfolio drift. So you've become more risky. And so maybe time to take more money off the table. And so, yeah, I mean, really, that's kind of what I had for you here, Carol. I'm sure there's some more that you may have.
Thank you so much for that. Now, it's time for me to present. Professor Geronimo is the senior partner of Romulo Mabanta law firm, and he is what you call the trust guru of the Philippines. Everything about trust and estates. This is something we are not very familiar in the Philippines, and we need to learn more about exactly how trust works in the Philippines.
I worked for a while at the Provident National Bank, and many of the things that you discussed earlier, we did because I worked in the trust department of Provident National Bank. But I had to work only for 1 year because that was the only time that was permitted of me as a graduate student. And I also wanted to come home because by then Marcos had declared martial law. My parents were in the Philippines, so I said, we will share the joys and tears of martial law together in the same place. What I'd like to do is to first deal with the basic points about trust and estates in the Philippines. For 300 years under the Spanish rule, we had no trust and estates. It was introduced in the Philippines by General Dewey in the fake Battle of Manila Bay. I call it fake because while he was pretending to shoot at the Spaniards, he was really shooting at the Filipinos who were defending our shores. But anyway, he brought it with him, and together with him were the many teachers who set up several universities, among them the University of Santo Tomas, the University, the Ateneo University right now, which is then the same university where Jose Rizal went to. Now, I have two cases or two codes to refer you to. If you are going to get some materials from Carol, she should give you a copy of the new Civil Code, particularly Article 1448, and a copy of the National Internal Revenue Code of 1997, particularly sections 84 to 104. Those are respectively, the trust provisions in the new Civil Code. We still call it new in spite of the fact that it was in 1950s, but that's all right. And the National Internal Revenue Code of 1997, which is and then amended by Congress. There are some observations. The use of estate is usually referring to land. Of course, the technicals among us, estate includes stocks, bonds, personal property. But for many people in the Philippines, when you say, I have an estate, they think, and they will automatically think that you are saying that you have land in the Philippines. Now, what is the use of the word trust? Trust does not mean confidence. It's very often that you don't have confidence. Usually, it has three particular forms of ownership. First is you call the person who creates the trust the trustor. That is how he's called in the civil code. The National Internal Revenue Code, which we copied from the United States, calls him also grantor, but does not call him trustor. So this is where you can see that many of our laws say different things or use different words, but mean the same thing. So first, you have a trustor or grantor, the one who creates the trust, who makes the trust. Actually, technically, he's the one who transfers the property. Second, the person who accepts the trust. And he's the one who does not accept the ownership, he accepts the duties of a trustee. And the third one is the beneficiary. He is one who accepts. Of course, he's stupid if he does not accept. He accepts the beneficiary's benefits of a trustee, of a trust, and he accepts this beneficiaries almost without cost to him. Now, what are the essential requisites of trusts in the Philippines? First, you have to have a legal purpose of your trust. You cannot have a purpose of the trust, setting up a trust to kill another person who is your enemy. The purpose of the trust must be legal. Second, the agreement of the trustee must be written. There must be an agreement on the part of the trustee to act as your trustee. Because when he acts as your trustee, he is accepting obligations for you. He is also accepting introductions. He is also accepting the obligations that the government is imposing on trustees through the what we now call the Bangko Sentral ng Pilipinas. The trust officer is the person in the bank who is specifically learned in the trust principles. And as a matter of fact, it's not supposed to delve into the activities of the bank. Now, the reason why I suggest that you go to the trust officer of the bank is because we have organized all these trust officers. And we had called this the Trust Officers Association of the Philippines. At one time, I was a director, and we gathered all the trust officers and said that if we want to talk to the central bank, we have to have only one voice, and that is the voice of the association. Then we found out that all those who are trust officers did not know the same things. So we formed another corporation. We formed a trust institute, which is supposed to be some sort of a university. We taught institutes, we taught the different subjects a trust officer should know, so that when the person graduates from that quotes university, then we have some sort of an assurance that he knows at least the minimum of what we think he should know. Now, there was a time when the Central Bank of the Philippines did not approve the appointment of a trust officer who was not a graduate of our university. But now I think the Central Bank is also setting up its own school for trust officers. So that's okay with us too. Because
one of the questions that my clients might ask you is, can they put limited power to the trustee? Let's say the client does not want to sell the property after her death. Is that a possibility?
Yes, that is a possibility, because after the trust gets the property, you can also appoint successor trustees in case the trustee dies. And so actually there is a trust called a charitable trust. That one goes on forever. There is no need to do things. But there is also a trust where you have to do things. What can usually be done, and what I usually do, is when the trust is about to terminate, I call the parties together and say, let us redo the documents. And so one acts as trustee, the other one acts as trustor, and the beneficiary accepts, and that continues on and on.
So what is the term of, you said just before it terminates? So is there a term for how long, how many years will the trust be good for?
A lifetime in being plus 20.
Okay,
Before
so that is the basic rule we have in the Philippines. One lifetime plus 20 years after the death of the grantor. Is that correct?
That's correct. That's correct. Now, within that lifetime, within that 20 years, actually, you gather everybody and say, okay, this will terminate in 2 years, 3 years, and so forth. So let us redo the documentation, and that is usually agrees.
Okay, so it's not really so bad because you have the 20 years from the death of the original grantor, and at this point they could redo the trust. So it is a viable, one of the strategies that we could also adopt and refer to you in the Philippines for our clients. But I know you also mentioned that real estate properties in the Philippines are now usually set up in a corporation. Is that correct?
Yes, that is the favored form for holding title to real estate. The reason for that is the common practice is that the lawyers, as in the law firms, we get ourselves appointed as corporate secretaries. The corporate secretaries hold the books of the corporation, the stock and transfer book. Now, the stock and transfer book has a listing of the owners, but in many, many cases, the stock and transfer book is blank. The lawyer does not fill it out, and fills it out only if the beneficiaries or the stockholders insist But for most part, they just fill it blank. How do you document the transfer from one beneficiary to the other, or from one grantor to another trust? What you do is you put a deed of assignment, and you simply put it together with the stock and transfer book inside, and keep it in the hands of the corporate secretary. That's why the corporate secretary is a very important and significant role that a person, a lawyer, assumes when he gets the lawyer of a big corporation. It is important that the corporate secretary, well, number one, knows his law. Number two, knows what to do against the law. And number three, what to tell the beneficiaries. If the beneficiary is hostile, for instance, or the beneficiaries do not know and are really honestly asking for what is going on in their corporation. That's correct. Real
All right.
estate.
So in my experience, many non-Filipinos, Americans actually own properties in the Philippines using corporations, and they appoint corporate secretaries, like you say. And of course, there's a possibility of, putting so many other people, and that might be a problem later on. But by having the trust, this adds a layer of protection for the clients to have a trustee from the bank. So at least in the Philippines, you got to get a trustee, which is part of the trustee from the bank. Unlike our trust here in the United States, you can appoint any trustee you want. But also depends here in the United States, the trust can go on forever. Depends on which state you organize the trust. Well, thank you, everyone. Thank you, my friends. We want to see you soon again. And we welcome your comments, your suggestions, and even the topics that you want to take up in the near future. Let us know how we're doing.